Alright, if you guys have not seen Michael Todd's latest pronation video, I'm pretty sure this is either right at or really close, or it is the heaviest he's ever done on this pronation lift. So I kind of wanted to look at the form, talk about how applicable this is to arm wrestling. So let's go ahead and get onto the lift here. Now, a couple things. This is obviously based off of Devin Laird's pronation lift, and there are a few things that Michael does differently. So right off the bat, one that quite a few people talk about, he does have that strap going pretty low down his forearm, but Devin tends to do that as well. The biggest difference right off the bat is Michael seems to have a little bit of cupping going on in his wrist. Devin, we normally see him kicking back slightly. And I think the kickback is important for a couple of reasons. It's not going to make that big of a difference unless you're like just totally cupping at like a 90-degree angle. Then that could start to put you in a position where it's not really taxing your pronator that much anymore. But just a slight amount of cup is probably not too big of a deal. At least in my experience, I do find it to be a little more difficult with the kickback. And the kickback better mimics certain things that you might be doing in a match. If you're trying to block a hook, potentially having a little bit of kickback in your wrist is better. And sometimes if you're really trying to go up over the top, a slight amount of kickback could make it easier for you to climb, to kind of escape out the back. But overall, so far, to me, this doesn't make a huge difference. Maybe not totally ideal, but I think it's fine. The biggest difference we're going to see in terms of positioning, we see Michael starting out, it looks like his elbow is on the side of his leg, but as he begins to lift this weight, we're going to see that elbow slide up the leg. And this makes it pretty difficult to tell what's going on here. Depending on the angle you're using, having your elbow on your leg like this could potentially make hardly any difference at all, or it could make a very big difference. I think it depends on even things like the shape of your quad. It depends on how far your elbow is past the edge of your leg. There's a lot of factors that go in to this to try to determine how difficult would this be compared to if Michael just kept his elbow on the side of his leg. I think most people are going to find this lift right here easier than if you kept your elbow on the side of your leg like Devin normally does. So it's hard to gauge exactly what percentage is Michael making the lift easier. Is this equivalent to say like a 180 if he kept his elbow on the side of his thigh? It's a little bit less consistent, a little bit less measurable. All those things being said, and then one more thing, obviously, this forearm angle is not at a 90-degree angle. Looks like the highest he gets it is right about there. So not too bad, like that's a little bit lower than the 90. But he's not going to be reducing the leverage or the amount of force that's being applied onto his elbow flexor by that much. I think there are several things he's doing that make the lift a little easier. But all those things being said, of course, this is still insanely impressive. This is 201 pounds. Like I said, I believe this is the most Michael's done on this lift. And there's still going to be a huge carryover onto the table, especially in Michael's style. Michael is using an arm angle that seems to be pretty close to what he normally has in his matches. Kind of at that King's move angle or just a really open top roll. But he's in this position a lot of times. So I think especially for Michael, this lift is pretty good. Now, overall, I do think that this is making the lift easier, this lower forearm angle, but it's hard to tell by how much. Is it easier to have a forearm angle that's above parallel or below parallel? I think it kind of depends a little bit. If Michael was doing this with a forearm angle directly parallel to the floor, that would be extremely impressive to me. This is still good, but that would be even more impressive. Like I said, it's just a little difficult to gauge. Is this 90% as impressive, 85% as impressive? It's not as consistent. Part of the reason Devin puts his elbow down lower on his leg is to keep the lift consistent, to keep it measurable, so that you know 100% when you got stronger versus did you just cheat the lift or did you actually get stronger? With this technique, it makes it a little bit more difficult to measure these things. So all that being said, I do think that Michael Todd, even if he put his elbow on his leg. And I think part of the reason he doesn't do that is because it's impossible then for him to access his king's move angle. So really, if you're Michael Todd, that might not make sense to do that. Michael's not going to be arm wrestling in a 90-degree position like this. He's going to be arm wrestling in this position. And as he starts to dip his shoulder, if he had his elbow on his kind of inner thigh, that just wouldn't work because his shoulder would start to leverage the weight off of that anyway. Because he's dipping his shoulder, because he wants to be pulling in this open angle to mimic his table time. So to me, maybe this lift is a little bit better for Michael Todd. For most people, I would think they want the elbow on the inner thigh to keep it consistent. But either way, I think that this lift is super impressive. And I think Michael has showed that no one in the world can simply grab onto him and contain him doing like a lat drag in a cup or something like that. He pulled Hermes, who I think has a really strong hand. He's one of the best arm wrestlers in the world. I would put him at either top 2 or top 3 in the world. And Hermes did beat him in that match. But when Hermes just tried to kind of go sideways a little bit and keep his cup, we saw that that was nowhere near possible. Even someone like Hermes completely lost his wrist against Michael. There's no way that he could even be close to simply cupping Michael in and then going sideways. And I think even someone like Levon Saginashvili, I don't think he could simply cup and contain Michael Todd and go sideways. I think everyone has to go up and over the top of Michael. So all that being said, the point of this is that whatever Michael's doing with this lift, whatever he's doing with this King's move, I think it's working very well. And I think he has reached that level where no one is going to beat him if they were using the exact technique that this lift is designed to counter. This lift is basically if someone is trying to just cup and contain you, this lift is the counter to that. So I think Michael's taken this in one way as far as he needs to, because you look at anyone who's beaten Michael Todd in the last several years, I don't think anyone ever hooked him, unless I'm just completely forgetting something. I don't think anyone has ever hooked him. I don't think anyone has ever contained him and just gone sideways. They either beat him by going over the top and climbing, or by a flop press, or by what Hermes did, which was climbing first and then kind of flopping through the outside of his hand. So I think that this lift is great. I think it's basically to the level it needs to be, though, where it's completely past anyone's reach in terms of just trying to contain Michael Todd. And to me, what's probably more important at this point is that over the top, over the knuckles riser lift, because this one's already plenty strong, but I think that Michael's initiation, his opening, his ability to stop people from going up over the top of him, that's probably more his weak point right now. And that, I think, if he ever were to pull someone like Levon, if he's going to pull Hermes again, if he pulls Vitaly, potentially that's the strength that matters a lot more for him. But yeah, overall, I am super impressed by this lift. Like I said, I think that there are 2 or 3 things that aren't quite, I won't even say that they're worse. I would just say that they're different and less measurable. So, and part of the reason Michael's doing that maybe is just because he wants to hit this really open angle. And it's going to be awkward for him to try to do that by keeping that elbow, or even impossible by keeping the elbow on the inner thigh. So I almost wonder if it might be better for Michael to have some sort of setup that involves a table to where he could get into a better position to lift this weight from this angle that he wants to be at. Because we're also just dealing with over 200 pounds here on one arm. And there's a certain point when you're lifting this weight, you're using your shoulder, you're using even like your obliques a little bit, just kind of some awkward positions you're in, and trying to use muscles that really aren't designed to lift this much weight, especially not only on one side of your body. So I think he's also just running into other muscles, random muscles kind of failing to a certain extent, where his arm is so strong that he's using 200 pounds. And so the lift overall is maybe just awkward to try to do it from this crouching position. So I wonder if maybe even Michael's switching his lift altogether, where he can keep this arm angle, but then he can work on getting the forearm a little bit closer to parallel and doing more of a seesaw kind of action instead of dragging the weight up like this. This isn't exactly what the lift is designed to do, but yeah, maybe he could mess with the setup a little bit and get that a little bit more comfortable. But overall, I think this lift is still very, very impressive. Even if the form is matched perfectly the way Michael's doing it, I think it makes it a little easier. But even if you perfectly match this form, I don't think Hermes can do this. I don't think Devin can do this. I definitely don't think Vitaly, Alex, any of the people with a longer arm can do it. The only one I think could maybe do this is Levon. But even still, I think that would be pretty difficult for him. If he could do it, I think it would be very close to max. So I think whatever Michael's doing, it's working with this lift. I think the reason he's losing is because of his radial deviation strength is not on par with his back pressure and pronation. But overall, let me know what you guys think about this. Like I said, super impressive, just not as measurable. Maybe not the best form for Michael, but still very, very impressive overall. And I think he's totally unhookable. So let me know what you guys think about this. I'll talk to you later.